No, please, he's coming." A plea tore through the heavy silence of the courtroom, not from the mouth of the defendant Paul, but from Zeka, the parrot perched on his lawyer's shoulder. The judge froze, the prosecutor paled. Paul's fate, accused of the brutal murder of his wife Marcia, was sealed by an imminent verdict. But that voice, those words, were not Paul's nor Marcia's. They were a chilling echo of a night of terror, an unlikely witness who now, with a desperate cry, was about to turn the trial on its head. And what Zeka revealed would forever change the face of justice. The voice, deep and unknown, reverberated through the solemn walls of the courtroom, breaking the tension with unexpected force. Judge Almeida, usually impassive, leaned slightly forward, his narrowed eyes fixed on the small green and yellow parrot. A murmur began to spread among those present, like a whisper of wind in a silent field, but it was quickly stifled by the firm gavel strike of the judge. "Order! Order in this court!" His voice thundered, although he himself seemed visibly shaken by the unusual scene. He adjusted his glasses, trying to process what he had just heard. Prosecutor Costa, a burly man with an always confident demeanor, now seemed to have shrunk in his chair. His thin lips were pressed into a hard line, and cold sweat trickled down his forehead, revealing a nervousness he rarely showed. He cast an incredulous glance at Zeka, as if the animal were a poorly rehearsed play, a farce to divert attention. Paul's defense attorney, Mendez, a man already weary from what seemed to be a lost battle, widened his eyes. He looked at Paul, then at Zeka, a spark of what seemed like hope igniting in his once hopeless, almost extinguished gaze. A furrow of perplexity and a hint of wonder crossed his face. Paul, for his part, was paralyzed. His eyes, which for months had carried the weight of unspeakable grief and the shadow of impending injustice, now shone with a mix of dread and a faint, almost imperceptible light. He felt his heart pounding in his chest, an erratic rhythm he hadn't experienced in a long time, as if he were waking from a long and painful sleep. Zeka, his only loyal companion, the only being who didn't judge him, had spoken. And the words were not his own. They were an echo of something terrible, but also, perhaps, a glimpse of the truth. Suddenly, Zeka shook its head, as if reliving a moment of great impact. Its small claw tightened on defense attorney Mendez's shoulder. And then, in the same strange, masculine voice, the parrot repeated, this time with even more chilling clarity, almost as if dictating a testimony, "I told you to shut up, no one will know." The intonation was perfect, the contained rage and threatening tone undeniable. A sepulchral silence descended upon the courtroom, denser and heavier than before. Zeka's words echoed in everyone's minds, filling every corner, every thought. There was no way to ignore the gravity of those phrases. They were not mere random imitations of everyday sounds. They were fragments of a conversation, of a threat, of a dark secret that was now unexpectedly unraveling. The jurors exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from shock to intense curiosity, the scales of justice seeming to tip towards an unknown side. Paul's breath caught in his throat. He remembered the fateful night, the emptiness in his home, Marcia's sudden absence. He had been the only one there, or so he thought, in his grief and confusion. But Zeka had always been there, a silent observer, and now a vocal witness. The parrot, which to everyone was just a pet, an insignificant detail in the tragedy of his life, now revealed itself to be the most crucial witness, the missing piece. Warm, bitter tears rolled down Paul's face, no longer from despair, but from a complex emotion that mixed shock, relief, and a long-forgotten glimmer of hope which seemed to sprout from the depths of his soul. Defense attorney Mendez, his voice choked with emotion and surprise, finally found the words, rising with new energy. "Your Honor, this is irrefutable evidence, Zeka." He was there. He heard. The prosecutor tried to intervene. "Absurd! An animal cannot be a witness. This is inadmissible." But his words sounded hollow, devoid of his usual conviction, and his voice faltered. Judge Almeida raised his hand, his expression now a mix of perplexity and deep seriousness. He looked at the parrot, then at Paul, and a difficult but necessary decision began to form in his mind, weighing the significance of that revelation. Truth, at times, chose the most unlikely messengers to manifest itself. Judge Almeida, his forehead furrowed in deep concentration, lowered his gaze to his hands clasped on the bench. The weight of the moment was immense. Never in his career had he encountered such an extraordinary situation. A parrot, a pet, had uttered words that could dismantle a murder case. He took a deep breath, adjusting his robe, and raised his eyes, seeking firmness. "This court," he began, his voice grave and measured, "cannot ignore what it has just witnessed. Although the admissibility of an animal is unprecedented, Zeka's words demand serious consideration. Given the gravity and crucial evidence, I declare the immediate suspension of this trial." A murmur erupted, loud and persistent. The jurors whispered, some with wide eyes, others with furrowed brows in doubt. In the gallery, people leaned forward, shock and disbelief etched on their faces. Prosecutor Costa rose abruptly, his face red with fury. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is an outrage. We cannot allow a mere animal, which repeats sounds without comprehension, to alter the course of justice. This is a circus, not a courtroom." His voice, once authoritative, now sounded desperate. Defense attorney Mendez, however, felt a wave of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Hope, which he thought had died, was reborn with overwhelming force. He turned to Paul, who still seemed in a trance, his tear-filled eyes fixed on Zeka. "Paul," the lawyer whispered, placing a hand on the defendant's shoulder, "we have a chance, a real chance." Paul merely nodded, unable to speak, the whirlwind of emotion suffocating him. That glimpse of justice and truth was almost painful after so many months of darkness. Judge Almeida, with a firm gesture of his hand, silenced Prosecutor Costa. "Prosecutor Costa, your objection is noted. However, the recording of the sounds and the clarity of the phrases uttered by Zeka are undeniable. The court cannot close its eyes to something that could be the key to unraveling the truth about Marsha's death. I order that the parrot Zeka be held in court custody in a safe and monitored environment so that its ability to reproduce sounds can be investigated. Furthermore, the police will be instructed to reopen the investigation based on this new and surprising information." The judge's words struck the courtroom like lightning. Prosecutor Costa collapsed in his chair, his face ashen. His meticulously constructed accusation crumbled before an unusual witness. Defense attorney Mendez, on the other hand, felt a lump in his throat. He looked at Zeka, who now rested calmly on Paul's shoulder, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That small being, so faithful and silent, had become the voice of truth, a beacon of hope amidst the storm. Paul finally managed to take a deep breath. The grief and longing for Marsha were open wounds, but the weight of guilt and injustice began to dissipate. A solitary tear rolled down his face, not of sadness, but of deep, almost unbearable relief. His family and friends, who had supported him, would now have the chance to see the truth. The human connection and faith in justice were reaffirmed. The overcoming of an insurmountable obstacle was taking shape, driven by the unexpected voice of a small parrot. Justice, at times, chose the most winding paths and the most unlikely messengers, and on that day it had found its echo in Zeka. Judge Almeida's decision reverberated, not only through the solemn walls of the courtroom, but in the soul of everyone present, an echo that promised to change the course of history. For Paul, it was like the blossoming of a flower in an arid desert, an unexpected miracle. He felt a long-forgotten warmth spread through his chest, dispelling the biting cold of despair that had accompanied him for months. His eyes, once glazed with pain, now fixed on Zeka, who, oblivious to the commotion, gently pecked his shoulder. A pure, crystalline tear rolled down Paul's face, a silent testament to the overwhelming relief that flooded him, a relief so profound it almost made him falter, his legs weakened by the sudden surge of emotions. Defense attorney Mendez, standing, felt his legs tremble, not from fatigue, but from renewed energy and fierce determination. His voice, once hoarse and resigned, was now firm, resonating with a clear purpose. He watched Prosecutor Costa, who seemed to have aged 10 years in a few minutes, his face pale and thin lips trembling slightly. His once imposing posture, now stooped, shoulders slumped, revealed defeat. Justice, which he believed he served, now confronted him with an unexpected truth, coming from a source he could never have predicted. The conviction that drove him crumbled, replaced by a disturbing emptiness. Judge Almeida, with his peculiar dignity and a demeanor of profound seriousness, gave instructions for Zeka's custody. The Parrot will be taken to a secure location, under the supervision of an avian specialist and a court officer, ensuring its well-being and the integrity of any future evidence. No one, except the designated team, will have access to it without my express authorization. The idea of a parrot in judicial custody was, for many, almost comical, but for the judge, it was the only way to ensure that the truth, however unusual, would come to light. Paul was allowed to approach Zeka before its departure. With trembling hands, he stroked the parrot's soft feathers, feeling the familiarity and comfort. "My friend," he whispered, his voice choked with gratitude. You saved my life. You saved the truth." Zeka tilted its head as if understanding, and emitted a soft chirp, a sound that at that moment was worth more than 1,000 words. The separation would be difficult, a new sacrifice, but necessary for justice to be served. It was a crucial step for Marsha's memory and for Paul's chance to rebuild his life, free from the burden of unjust guilt. Outside the courtroom, the news of the turnaround spread like wildfire. Journalists previously focused on the imminent conviction now rushed to capture every detail. Paul's family, who had waited with heavy hearts, burst into tears of joy and disbelief upon learning of the trial suspension and the reopening of the investigation. His sister Anna ran to hug him tightly, her tears wetting his jacket. "We never doubted you, Paul. Never," she sobbed, her voice choked with emotion and relief. His family's unconditional support was the pillar that kept him standing, a constant reminder of human connection. The days that followed were of a different intensity, marked by new energy and renewed purpose. The investigation, previously stagnant, gained new momentum. Detectives, now armed with the recording of Zeka's words, reviewed every detail of the case, seeking any clue that could lead to the man whose voice the parrot had imitated. Hope, once a tenuous thread, now wove into a stronger tapestry. Though still fragile in the face of challenges, Paul, though still under the weight of Marcia's irreparable loss and uncertainty, felt a renewed purpose. He knew the journey would be long and arduous, but he would not be alone. The truth, revealed by such an unlikely messenger, promised justice for Marcia and a new chance for him. The unwavering faith in justice and the overcoming of an insurmountable obstacle became the driving force of his existence, driven by the unexpected voice of a small parrot who had become a symbol of hope and resilience for all. The wave of relief that had flooded Paul in the courtroom, though powerful, was only the first of many complex emotions that now assailed him. Conditional freedom was a gift, but the shadow of Marcia's loss and the uncertainty of the new investigation still loomed over him. In his house, which once seemed a tomb of silence and pain, now held a different echo, a silence that yearned for Zeka's presence. The parrot, in custody, was a vital link to the truth, but its absence left a palpable void, a constant reminder that the journey was far from over. Defense attorney Mendez, for his part, was in a frenzy of activity. The spark of hope Zeka had ignited transformed him into a beacon of determination. He spent hours reviewing the case files, searching for minutiae that once seemed irrelevant, but which now, in the light of the parrot's words, could reveal a completely new panorama. His team worked tirelessly, re-interviewing neighbors, looking for any minute detail that might have been overlooked. With each new clue, however small, the lawyer felt the responsibility for Paul on his shoulders, lighter but still present. The police, under the pressure of public opinion and the court order, reopened the case with renewed vigor. Sergeant Silva, an experienced detective with a serious demeanor, was assigned to lead the new team. He listened to the recording of Zeka's words repeatedly, trying to decipher not only the words, but the emotion behind them, the intonation, the anger. It was an unprecedented challenge, but Judge Almeida's seriousness and the clarity of the recording left no room for doubt. The search for the third element had become the top priority. Paul spent his days on an emotional roller coaster. Moments of deep gratitude for Zeka's intervention were followed by waves of overwhelming sadness, thinking of Marcia, the injustice of her death, and the time he had lost, trapped in his own grief and the accusation. His sister, Anna, was his rock. She visited him daily, bringing homemade meals and quiet conversations without pressure, just offering her presence and unconditional love. "You are strong, Paul, and the truth will come out," she would say, holding his hand firmly, her eyes conveying unwavering faith. The community, once divided, now watched with a mix of fascination and caution. The parrot's story spread, and many who had previously judged him began to reconsider. It was a slow but noticeable change, a small relief for the social burden Paul carried. He knew that regaining everyone's trust would take time, but the hope of clearing his name was a balm for his wounded soul. Meanwhile, Zeka was in a controlled environment under the observation of a team of specialists. They recorded every sound it emitted, every movement, in the hope that it might repeat more fragments of that fateful night. For Paul, Zeka's absence was a constant reminder of the struggle that still lay ahead, but also a powerful symbol of the justice that now seemed possible. He longed for the day Zeka would return home, not just as his pet, but as the unlikely hero who had unraveled the truth. The connection between them, once just a comfort, now was living proof that hope can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that overcoming, even in the face of the deepest pain, was a possible path. Faith in justice, family, and human connection became the foundation for rebuilding his life, one brick at a time. Paul, though free from the cell, still felt bound by invisible chains of uncertainty and the pain of absence. The house, once filled with the sounds of life with Marcia and Zeka's chirping, now echoed a heavy silence, filled only by his own thoughts. He walked through the rooms, touching Marcia's objects, each touch a pang of longing, a vivid memory of love brutally interrupted. Upon waking, the first sensation was that of an emptiness in his chest, the unconscious search for the little feathered friend who wasn't there to greet him. Zeka's absence was a constant reminder that the battle for truth was not yet over, and that his little hero was far away, fulfilling his duty to justice. Anna, his sister, noticed the melancholy that still hung over Paul. With an affection that only a sister can offer, she involved him in her routine, bringing him back to reality with small gestures of affection. She prepared his favorite coffee, sat beside him on the sofa, simply holding his hand, without words, but with a presence that spoke volumes of unconditional love. "One step at a time, my brother," she repeated, her eyes filled with compassion, but firm in the belief of his innocence. She knew that the wound of injustice and loss would take time to heal, but she was determined to be a balm for Paul's soul. In the office, defense attorney Mendez delved into piles of documents, his mind sharper than ever. With each testimony, each report, he sought the shadow of the man whose voice Zeka had imitated. He met with Sergeant Silva, a man of few words, but with a keen eye, who now led the police investigation with renewed dedication. "We can't leave any stone unturned, Sergeant," defense attorney Mendez affirmed, his voice laden with a sense of purpose. "The truth is out there, and Zeka gave us the key." The sergeant, in turn, played the recording of Zeka's voice to each new witness, observing their reactions. Looking for any hint of recognition, however small, the team of specialists monitoring Zeka worked with meticulous care. In a climate-controlled and silent environment, they recorded every sound, every movement of the parrot. They tried to reproduce the conditions of the fateful night, with different male voices, hoping that Zeka might repeat something more, a name, a detail, any fragment that could solidify the clue. The parrot, oblivious to human complexity, merely observed with its curious eyes, occasionally emitting a chirp or a loose word. But the crucial phrases were not repeated, increasing everyone's anxiety. The community, once quick to judge, now divided between doubt and growing empathy. Some neighbors who had previously avoided Paul now offered a timid nod, a hesitant smile. Others, however, kept their distance, the seed of doubt still planted in their hearts. Paul felt the weight of these gazes, the need to prove his innocence not only in court, but also in everyday life. He knew that the full restoration of his reputation would be a slow process, a social obstacle requiring patience and resilience. Despite everything, a flame of hope burned in Paul's chest. With each visit from Anna, with each call from defense attorney Mendez with new information, however small, his faith in justice grew stronger. He remembered Marcia, not with the paralyzing pain of before, but with the determination to honor her memory, seeking the truth that Zeka had begun to unravel. Overcoming was not just a word, it was a path, a commitment. He knew the journey would be long, but he was not alone. Human connection, family love, and the relentless pursuit of justice were the pillars that sustained him, brick by brick, in the rebuilding of his life, driven by the unexpected echo of a small parrot. The days dragged on in waiting and anxiety. Paul spent his mornings helping Anna in the garden, seeking refuge in nature. In the afternoons, he read or watched the movement outside, wondering if Marcia's truth and the man behind Zeka's voice were among them. The parrot's absence was an open wound, a silence that weighed heavily. He missed the morning chirping, the peck on his shoulder, the silent companionship now vital. At the custody center, Zeka lived under a scientific spotlight. Dr. Helena Costa, a renowned ethologist, and her team observed every nuance. They reproduced sounds, showed images, tried to recreate environments, but Zeka remained enigmatic. It repeated random words, chirps, never the crucial phrases. Frustration grew, and skeptics questioned whether the initial words hadn't been a coincidence. Dr. Helena, however, refused to give up, feeling an intuition. Defense attorney Mendez and Sergeant Silva faced a wall. The voice recording was clear, but without a suspect to compare it to, it seemed just a faceless voice. They interviewed Marcia and Paul's acquaintances, turned over the past, but nothing fit. The sergeant, pragmatic, felt the weight of impossibility. "Defense attorney Mendez," he said, his voice tired. "We have no concrete leads. And the parrot, it's not saying anything else." Defense attorney Mendez, however, had an idea. "Sergeant, what if it's not the voice we need to compare, but the context?" Zeka didn't just repeat the words, he enacted them. The anger, the despair. Perhaps there's something in the way he repeated them that tells us more about who this man was, about his gestures, his intentions. He proposed a different approach to the specialists, recreate scenarios with actors and emotions. Dr. Helena, initially skeptical, agreed. In one test, an assistant with a deep voice and broad gestures enacted a heated argument, simulating contained anger. Zeka, until then indifferent, suddenly became agitated. Its feathers bristled. It flapped its wings frantically, a glint of terror in its black eyes. With clarity that chilled everyone's blood, it repeated the words with greater intensity, palpable despair. "No, please, he's coming." Then, in the deep, threatening voice, "I told you to shut up. No one will know." But Zeka added something new, an almost inaudible murmur of deep fear. "The clock. The clock." The silence that followed was deeper than that of the courtroom. Dr. Helena felt a shiver. It was no coincidence. Zeka was reliving the trauma, and the new word, clock, was a thread of hope. She knew they had found a turning point. Truth, at times stubborn, Zeka was determined to reveal it. Her eyes fixed on the parrot, which now seemed exhausted, its feathers still slightly bristled, but its breathing calmer. Dr. Helena approached cautiously, her voice low and laden with contained emotion. "He gave us something new," she whispered, more to herself than to the team. "A detail that could change everything." The team of specialists, previously skeptical, now exchanged looks of astonishment and admiration. That small being who seemed just a pet was indeed a crucial witness. Defense Attorney Mendez, upon receiving Dr. Helena's call, felt his heart race. "Clock," he repeated, the word echoing in his mind. A slow, hopeful smile began to spread across his face. He rose from his chair, renewed with energy, and began to pace his office. "This is gold, Dr. Helena, pure gold. This gives us a new direction." He knew that this small word could be the missing piece of the puzzle, the bridge between the unknown voice and the killer's identity. Immediately, Defense Attorney Mendez called Paul. The lawyer's voice, previously laden with professional formality, now overflowed with almost youthful enthusiasm. "Paul, you won't believe it. Zeka said another word. Clock." On the other end of the line, Paul felt an electric shock run through his body. "Clock?" he repeated, his mind spinning, trying to scour the memories of that night, of the house, of Marcia. There was a clock in the living room, an old pendulum clock, a wedding gift from his grandmother. Could it be that? Or something else? A specific time? A location? The news brought a wave of contradictory emotions. A pang of hope, almost painful in its intensity, mixed with the overwhelming sadness of having to relive every detail of the tragedy. He sat heavily on the sofa, his hands trembling slightly. Anna, who was in the kitchen preparing tea, noticed the change in her brother's expression. She rushed to him, her eyes worried. "What happened, Paul? Any news?" He just nodded, unable to speak, pointing to the phone. Sergeant Silver, upon being informed, furrowed his brow in concentration. "Clock," he murmured, his hands clasped on the table. It could be a wristwatch, a wall clock, an alarm clock, or even slang. But for the first time in months, there was a tangible direction. He summoned his team, his voice firm and determined. "We're going to redo all interviews, focusing on any mention of clocks, specific times, anything that might have been said or seen that involves a clock, and scour Paul and Marcia's house again, every corner, every object." The search for the third element gained a new and unexpected contour. For Paul, the word clock was like a rusty key that slowly began to turn in the lock of his memory. He closed his eyes, trying to visualize the scene, the sounds, the details of the night. His life collapsed. The image of Marcia, Her smile, her voice, mingled with the shadow of an intruder and the sound of a clock, perhaps the old pendulum clock in the living room, which marked the relentless time of that tragedy. Overcoming, he knew, would not come from amnesia, but from the courage to face every memory, every pain, so that the truth could finally shine. Family, justice, and human connection intertwined, driven by Zeka's unexpected voice. Paul, with the word clock echoing in his mind, plunged into a sea of memories, each wave bringing with it the pain of loss and the urgency of truth. He sat for hours on the old living room sofa, the same one where he and Marcia had so often shared laughter and plans, and now where her absence was an almost unbearable burden. His eyes scanned the room, searching for the pendulum clock, a wedding gift from his grandmother, which had always marked time with its soft, constant beat. Was Zeka referring to it, or a wristwatch, a detail forgotten amidst the chaos of that night? Paul's mind was a whirlwind of images and sounds, a desperate attempt to reconstruct the puzzle. Anna, with her keen sensitivity, perceived her brother's silent anguish. She prepared calming herbal teas, sat beside him without demanding conversation, just offering the warmth of her presence and the comforting touch of her hand. "Don't push yourself too hard, Paul," she whispered. "The memories will come when they're ready. The important thing is that they're coming now." Her support was a balm for Paul's wounded soul, a constant reminder of the unwavering strength of family. While Paul struggled with his memories, Sergeant Silver and his team delved into the new clue. The word clock was a thread, but a thread tangled in a ball of possibilities. They re-interviewed neighbors and acquaintances, now with a specific question. "Do you remember seeing or hearing anything about a clock on the night of the crime? Any broken clock, a loud noise, a mention of an unusual time?" The search was meticulous, almost obsessive. Every detail, however small, was noted and cross-referenced with existing information. Paul and Marcia's house was searched again, not just for a physical clock, but for any clue that could link the word to a specific context. The sergeant, a man of logical and pragmatic reasoning, felt frustration grow with the lack of immediate results, but Judge Almeida's determination and the clarity of Zeka's recording spurred him not to give up. Defense attorney Mendez, for his part, worked tirelessly in his office, lights on until late at night. He reviewed testimonies, looking for any subtle mention of clocks or times that might have been overlooked. His strategic mind tried to connect Zeka's word to a motive, to a pattern. "Sergeant, we need to think outside the box," he argued in one of his many calls. "Perhaps it's not a physical clock, but an expression, a code. Or perhaps the assailant was concerned about time, about his escape time." He proposed that the investigation team focus on people who had a history of excessive punctuality or who might have had a reason to be concerned about time that night. Hope, though still fragile, was a powerful engine. At the custody center, Dr. Helena Costa and her team continued to work with Zeka. They had set up an environment that simulated Paul's living room, with different types of clocks, wall clocks, wristwatches, an alarm clock, and even Paul's pendulum clock brought under judicial custody. They tried to recreate the sounds, the voices, the emotions, hoping that Zeka might offer more fragments. The Parrot, however, seemed to have closed itself off again, repeating only chirps and loose words, oblivious to the anxiety surrounding it. Dr. Helena felt the pressure, but her intuition told her that Zeka had more to reveal. She observed the Parrot with almost maternal patience, noting its small gestures, its head movements, hoping to decipher its silence. It was during one of these sessions that one of the assistants, while adjusting the pendulum clock to a specific time, noticed something. Zeka, who was perched and seemingly uninterested, suddenly became agitated. Its feathers bristled slightly. It emitted a low sound, almost a grunt, different from its usual chirps. The assistant, following Dr. Helena's instruction to record any anomaly, noted the exact time, 11:45 p.m. It wasn't a word, but a reaction to a time. Dr. Helena felt a shiver run down her spine. Could it be that Zeka was reacting not to the object, clock, but to the time it represented? That time, 11:45 p.m., was the same time neighbors had reported hearing a muffled argument on the night of the crime. The connection was tenuous, but real. Hope ignited again, stronger than ever, a beacon in the darkness of uncertainty. Truth, at times, revealed itself in whispers, in subtle gestures, and Zeka, the unlikely guardian, was once again opening a path. Dr. Helena, her heart pounding, observed Zeka. That small being had just offered an invaluable clue. She called her team, her voice choked with contained emotion. Record everything, every detail of Zeka's reaction to this time. We need more tests, but with a focus on time, not just the object. The discovery that Zeka reacted to the exact time of 11:45 p.m., the same time neighbors had heard the argument, was more than a coincidence. It was a scientific validation of the Parrot's memory, a crucial link connecting Zeka's trauma to the crime's timeline. Defense attorney Mendez received Dr. Helena's call with an euphoria he rarely showed. 11:45 p.m., that's it, Dr. Helena. It's the missing piece. He felt a lump in his throat dissolve, the tension of months beginning to ease. That time, previously just a vague detail in neighbors' testimonies, now gained overwhelming significance. Immediately, he contacted Sergeant Silver, who, upon hearing the news, felt a flash of hope ignite in his eyes, previously so tired. "Sergeant, we have an exact time. 11:45 p.m., Defense Attorney Mendez exclaimed, his voice vibrant. Zeka didn't react to the clock, but to the time. This means the assailant was concerned about time, or that something significant happened at that moment. Sergeant Silver nodded, his mind already tracing a new plan of action. He summoned his team, renewed determination in his serious demeanor. We're going to redo all interviews, with a surgical focus on 11:45 p.m. Who was where? Who saw what? Anyone who mentioned the time, or who has an alibi for that moment, needs to be re-evaluated. For Paul, the news of the time brought a bittersweet mix of relief and pain. 11:45 p.m. He closed his eyes, trying to force his mind to relive those fateful minutes. The image of Marcia, the assailant's voice, the sound of the pendulum clock in the living room. He remembered Marcia saying she needed to finish some work before midnight. Could that be it? A pang of guilt struck him for not remembering sooner, but the truth was that trauma had obscured every detail. Anna, seeing her brother immersed in his memories, sat beside him, holding his hand with tenderness. "You're doing an incredible job, my brother. Every bit of memory you recover brings us closer to the truth." Her words were a balm, a reminder that he was not alone on this journey of rebuilding. The community, now more curious than skeptical, watched the turn of events. The story of the Parrot and the exact time spread, and empathy for Paul grew, slowly but steadily. The search for the third element now had a more precise target. Paul's overcoming was not just about his innocence, but about the courage to face pain and injustice, brick by brick. Faith in justice, family, and human connection grew stronger, driven by the unexpected echo of a small parrot who, in its silence, had held the key to the truth. Paul, his mind still in a whirlwind, felt the weight of that time, 11:45 p.m., like an anchor pulling him into the depths of that terrible night. He strained, closing his eyes to visualize every detail, every shadow, every sound. Marcia, with her tired but determined smile, sitting at the desk, typing hurriedly to meet the deadline before midnight. The memory was vivid, almost palpable. "I need to finish this, Paul, before the clock strikes 12, she had said with a slight yawn. He, for his part, was in the living room, perhaps reading, perhaps watching a television program. The muffled sound of the pendulum clock filling the silence. A pang of pain shot through his chest. How could he have forgotten such a crucial detail? Guilt was a heavy burden, but the hope that this memory could help unravel the mystery was a bitter-sweet relief. Anna, observing her brother, felt the intensity of his internal struggle. She approached, sitting beside him on the sofa, and gently took his hand. "It's okay, Paul. Memories come when they're ready. Don't blame yourself for it. The important thing is that they're coming now." Her eyes, full of affection and understanding, were a mirror of the strength she tried to convey. Paul squeezed her hand, a silent gesture of gratitude. Anna's presence was a safe harbor amidst the storm of his emotions. In Defense Attorney Mendez's office, the energy was palpable. The information about the time had ignited a new flame of determination. He and Sergeant Silva were poring over maps and reports, marking each house, each testimony, with a renewed focus. "We need to know who was where, exactly at 11:45 p.m., Defense Attorney Mendez emphasized, tapping lightly with his pen on the table. "Any inconsistency, any hesitation, however small, could be the clue we need." The sergeant, with his serious demeanor and keen eye, had already mobilized his team. They retraced the routes of the neighbors who had been interviewed, checking security cameras of nearby establishments, searching for any visual or auditory fragment that could corroborate or contradict the alibis. The search was no longer for a faceless voice, but for an individual who had a reason to be concerned about time that night, or who exhibited suspicious behavior at that exact minute. Meanwhile, at the custody center, Dr. Helena Costa analyzed the data of Zeka's reaction with almost surgical precision. She reviewed the recordings, the parrot's heart rate graphs, the small changes in its posture. "It was no coincidence," she affirmed to her team, pointing to a peak on the graph. "The reaction was clear and undeniable. Zeka is telling us that something very significant happened at that time." She prepared a detailed report for Defense Attorney Mendez, explaining the scientific basis behind the parrot's memory and the importance of the 11:45 p.m. time. Science, previously viewed with skepticism, now validated the most unlikely witness. The community, previously divided, now watched with a mix of fascination and respect. The story of the parrot that reacted to a specific time, revealing a crucial detail, spread like wildfire. Some neighbors who had previously avoided Paul now greeted him with a warmer nod, their gazes reflecting a growing understanding. Empathy for his pain and his fight for justice was a balm for Paul's soul, a sign that the truth, slowly, was beginning to prevail. Overcoming was not just an individual act, but a collective process driven by faith in justice and the human capacity to recognize truth, even when it echoes from the most unexpected, the most improbable places. Human connection, strengthened by hope, was the solid foundation upon which Paul began to rebuild his life, brick by brick. Sergeant Silva's team, following the new line of investigation, re-examined testimonies and security footage. A tiny detail, previously overlooked, caught the eye of a young detective. A car, a specific and uncommon model, had been seen parked a few blocks from Paul and Marcia's house around 11:40 p.m. The vehicle owner was Ricardo Alves, a former colleague of Marcia's, known for his almost obsessive punctuality and for wearing a heavy, flashy metal wristwatch. Ricardo had been briefly interviewed at the beginning of the investigation, but his alibi, though plausible, had not been examined with the same intensity as now. Defense Attorney Mendez felt a shiver run down his spine upon hearing Ricardo's name. He remembered Marcia mentioning Ricardo a few times, always with a tone of slight irritation about his insistence on deadlines and his controlling personality. The puzzle piece began to fit together in a frightening way. "Ricardo," he murmured. "Sergeant, investigate Ricardo. thoroughly. His alibi, his interactions with Marcia, anything that links him to a clock or a deadline. Check if he had any reason to be there, or if there had been any recent conflict with Marcia. Meanwhile, at the custody center, Dr. Helena Costa continued her tests with Zeka. She had noticed that the Parrot reacted not only to the 11:45 p.m. time, but also to a specific tone of voice, a cadence of contained anger that the assistant had replicated. When playing a recording of an argument between Ricardo and Marcia, obtained from old work emails that mentioned a delayed project and deadline pressure, Zeka became agitated again. Its feathers bristled, and it began to flap its wings, visible terror in its eyes. But this time, Zeka didn't just repeat the already known phrases. It added a new sound, a distinct metallic click, followed by an almost inaudible murmur. The clock. The clock. His. The click. Dr. Helena felt her heart race violently. It could be the sound of a wristwatch being adjusted, or perhaps a watch clasp. His clock, she repeated, her voice trembling, almost breathless. It was a tiny detail, but one that connected directly to Ricardo's obsession with schedules and his flashy watch. Science and intuition united in an overwhelming revelation. Defense attorney Mendez received Dr. Helena's call with the news of the metallic click and his clock. His eyes widened in shock and comprehension. "Sergeant, we have our man. Ricardo, the clock, the deadline, the voice, the time, everything fits." He felt a wave of adrenaline, an overwhelming certainty. The truth, once a distant whisper, now echoed with deafening clarity, about to be unraveled. Sergeant Silva, upon hearing Ricardo's name, felt a chill down his spine. He knew Ricardo from other minor cases, a man with a difficult temperament and a reputation for being overly controlling. The team was already on its way to Ricardo's house with a search and arrest warrant. The tension was palpable, but the certainty that they were on the right track was a powerful engine, propelling them towards the imminent confrontation. For Paul, the news that they had a suspect, Ricardo, and that Zeka had added the final piece of the puzzle, was a shock that left him breathless. He felt a mix of anger, relief, and deep sadness. The image of Ricardo's face, now associated with Zeka's threatening voice, was a heavy burden, but hope, once a thin thread, now transformed into a strong rope. Justice was one step away. Anna hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face, a mix of pain and gratitude. Finally, Paul. Finally. Human connection, unwavering faith in justice, and the overcoming of unimaginable pain were about to find their resolution. The climax was approaching, and the truth, driven by the voice of a parrot, was about to be revealed. That hug from Anna was a balm for Paul's torn soul. Her tears, warm on his shoulder, were a reflection of shared grief and the hope that was finally blossoming. He felt an immense weight begin to lift from his chest, a burden he had carried since that fateful night. The image of Ricardo, Marcia's former colleague, now solidified as the face behind the threatening voice Zeka had imitated. Anger simmered, but it was tempered by an overwhelming relief. The truth was emerging. While Paul and Anna clung to that fragile certainty, Sergeant Silva's team acted with surgical precision. They arrived at Ricardo Alves's residence in the cold morning light, the search and arrest warrant in hand. Ricardo, caught by surprise, tried to maintain composure, but his eyes, once so calculating, revealed a growing dread. The sergeant, with his firm and unwavering voice, presented the evidence. Zeka's recording, the Parrot's reaction to the exact time of 11:45 p.m., the metallic click, the mention of the wristwatch, and the uncommon car seen nearby. Ricardo, confronted with the web of circumstantial evidence and the unusual witness, collapsed. There was no violence, just the relentless force of truth. He was detained and taken for interrogation, where, after hours of denial, He eventually confessed the details of his twisted plan to incriminate Paul, motivated by a sick obsession with Marcia and a work project she refused to postpone. The news of Ricardo's arrest reverberated like thunder, first in the halls of justice, then throughout the community. Judge Almeida, with his peculiar seriousness, convened a new hearing. This time there was no accusation, but a public acknowledgement of Paul's innocence. The courtroom was packed, no longer with judgmental stares, but with curiosity and, for many, deep remorse. Defense attorney Mendez, with a discreet smile and tear-filled eyes, presented the new evidence, Dr. Helena Costa's detailed report about Zeka and Ricardo's confession. Paul, standing before the judge, felt his legs tremble. When Judge Almeida uttered the words, "Paul is officially exonerated of all charges," a murmur of relief swept through the room. A solitary tear rolled down Paul's face. He felt no euphoria, but a painful peace. Justice had been served, but Marcia's loss remained, a wound that time would heal, but would leave scars. Anna ran to hug him again, this time with pure joy, mixed with the sadness of Marcia's memory. "You are free, my brother. Free, finally." Her words were an echo of Zeka's voice that, from its perch in the custody room, had shouted the truth. Defense attorney Mendez shook Paul's hand with a strength that conveyed respect and admiration. "Truth always finds a way, Paul, sometimes through the most unexpected means." Sergeant Silva, a man of few words, merely nodded, a gleam of satisfaction in his tired eyes. Dr. Helena Costa, observing from afar, felt a silent pride for Zeka, the little parrot who had changed the course of so many lives. The community, once so quick to judge, now offered looks of apology and support. Neighbors who had previously avoided Paul now approached him with words of comfort. The story of Paul, of Zeka, and of the truth that echoed from the most improbable places became a powerful reminder of human resilience, the importance of faith, and the connection that binds us. Paul's overcoming was not just his own, but of everyone who, in some way, had been touched by this journey. He knew the path ahead would be long, but he would not be alone. His family, his friends, and Marcia's memory would be his strength. The days that followed the exoneration were a whirlwind of emotions for Paul. The relief was immense, as if a ton weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but the pain of Marcia's loss remained, a constant shadow in his heart. He allowed himself to cry, for the first time without the pressure of judgment, and Anna was always by his side, a pillar of love and understanding. Together they visited Marcia's grave, bringing fresh flowers and sharing memories, a ritual of farewell and a promise that her life would not be forgotten. Zeka, the unlikely hero, became the center of attention not only in Paul's home, but in the media. Its story spread across the country, and Dr. Helena Costa was invited to lecture at various universities, advocating for the importance of animal observation and behavioral forensic science. Paul and Zeka's case opened new doors for justice, showing that truth can manifest in ways the human mind by itself would never conceive. Defense attorney Mendez and Sergeant Silva, for their part, felt a deep pride in the outcome, a reminder that perseverance and faith in justice are rewarding. Paul slowly began to rebuild his life. He dedicated himself to a social project in the community, helping vulnerable families, a gesture of altruism that calmed his soul and honored Marcia's memory, who had always been so generous. The community, once skeptical, now embraced him with affection and respect. Neighbors offered help, invited him to dinners, and their gazes were of pure empathy. Paul realized that overcoming was not a solitary act, but a collective process, driven by human connection. He never forgot Zeka. The parrot, who had been the sole witness and the guardian of truth, remained with him, a constant reminder of life's fragility and hope's strength. Zeka, for its part, seemed more serene, as if the burden it carried had finally been lifted. Paul learned that life, even after the greatest storms, can blossom again. Justice had prevailed. The truth had been revealed, and he was free to live, to love, and to honor his wife's memory. The story of Paul and Zeka became a legend, a testament that faith, family, and the unexpected voice of truth can, indeed, heal the deepest wounds and inspire everyone to never give up. He knew Marcia would be proud, and that in some way she was always by his side, in every new dawn, in every act of kindness, and in the silent echo of the truth Zeka had revealed. He knew Marcia would be proud, and that in some way she was always by his side, in every new dawn, in every act of kindness, and in the silent echo of the truth Zeka had revealed. The months unfolded into a tapestry of days, each bringing a new layer of healing for Paul. At first, the silence of the house seemed even deeper without Marcia's vibrant presence, but little by little he began to fill it with new melodies. Zeka, with its emerald green feathers, was a constant, a living reminder that hope can emerge from the most unexpected places. It nestled on his shoulder as he watered the orchids Marcia loved so much, or repeated in an almost inaudible whisper some of the affectionate phrases Marcia used to say, bringing a bittersweet smile to Paul's lips. The social project, which Paul had embraced with such fervor, became his new purpose. He spent mornings at the Community Association headquarters, organizing food and clothing donations, listening to families' stories, and offering words of comfort. His eyes, which had seen so much pain and injustice, now reflected deep compassion and hard-earned wisdom. People, mostly younger women and mothers, saw in Paul not just a volunteer, but a maternal figure, an inspiration of resilience. He felt human connection blossom in every tight hug, in every grateful smile. It was a balm for his soul, a way to transform his own pain into a beacon of hope for others. Anna, his sister, continued to be his safe harbor. The two spent afternoons together, often sitting on the porch, drinking tea and watching the street activity. Anna, with her soft voice and attentive gaze, was Paul's confidant, the person with whom he could share both small joys and the persistent shadows of longing. "You are blossoming, Paul," Anna said one afternoon, holding her brother's hand. "Marcia would be so happy to see the good you are doing." Paul squeezed Anna's hand, a lump in his throat. "It's for her, Anna. It's for everything she taught me about kindness and justice." Defense attorney Mendez, the lawyer who fought tirelessly for Paul, visited him occasionally, bringing news about the impact of the Zeka case on the legal system. The Parrot's testimony had led to discussions about the inclusion of new forms of evidence and the importance of not underestimating any clue, however unusual. Sergeant Silver, for his part, had become a fierce advocate for detailed observation in all investigations, and Dr. Helena Costa continued her research, publishing articles and lecturing on animal intelligence and its role in forensic science. Paul and Zeka's case had become a landmark, a reminder that truth, at times, defies conventions and human logic. The community, once so divided, now surrounded Paul with an affection that warmed his heart. Neighbors who had previously avoided him now knocked on his door with a homemade cake or an invitation for coffee. The looks of distrust had been replaced by silent respect, an admiration for the strength of a man who, even amidst tragedy, found a way to rise again and help others. Paul, with his unwavering dignity and kindness, had become a symbol of overcoming, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. He knew that life would never be the same without Marcia, that the wound of loss would always exist, but he also knew that life, in its infinite wisdom, had given him a new path, a renewed purpose. Looking at Zeka, who watched him with its curious and intelligent eyes, Paul felt immense gratitude. That small being, with its unexpected voice, had not only freed him, but had also guided him to a new phase of his existence, where the memory of Marcia's love and the echo of truth intertwined in a promise of a future of peace and altruism.